Move that scope grid anomaly bearing 87. Track it now. But Captain Eric Volan's voice snapped like a snapped cable across the EDF observation floor, cutting through the low chatter and static bursts. Dozens of heads turned toward the main laser display mounted across the reinforced composite wall, its angular interface crackling with points of red emerging from deep space telemetry. There was no subtle buildup, just 73 alien warforms, descending from high orbit in a perfect triangular lattice. Earth's orbit was no longer a corridor, it was a cage. The bridge lights dimmed. Volan stepped forward, eyes tracing the movement of the Xantari fleet. Clean lines of burn trails mapped in pulsating arcs. His jaw tightened as the orbital overlay bled with priority alerts. One by one, Earth's own early warning satellites flickered out of sync. "We just lost the Hawaiian array," a technician reported, pale. "They're cutting our lines before we even speak." "Open a channel," Volan ordered. "Global. Translate to all primary tongues. Relay it straight to Geneva, then global dispatch. They want a reply. Let's not pretend we didn't hear them." The screen split. On one side, Earth's network trembled with cascade faults. On the other, a Xantari battleship loomed. Brutalist hull gleaming like wet obsidian, ringed in hard light tethers that swayed with unnatural rhythm. A single glyph appeared across the heads-up translator. One symbol, pulsing. Surrender. No timestamp, no name, no second line. They weren't asking. Inside the EDF Council bunker, buried beneath Greenland's polar stone, the representatives argued over shattered comms, flickering generators, and the whiplash of disbelief. Each screen showed the same unblinking threat. Moscow's defense satellites had just failed to respond. South Africa's continental railgun grid reported calibration anomalies. The EDF was unraveling, and no one had fired a shot yet. "They don't need to warn us," muttered Counselor Narek, the heavyset Atlantic rep. "They're showing us how small we are before they lift a weapon." "We reverse-engineered pieces of their drones from the 47 crash," Volan said, calmly, but not quietly. "We know what their weapons do. I've seen what's left of cities after they finish." "And what's your suggestion? We throw rocks at them?" snapped another delegate. "This isn't the Zarnok. These are the ones who built them." "No," Volan replied. "We don't throw anything. We slip right under them." He turned from the council room's curved screen and marched down the steel steps, coat flaring behind him, boots sharp on the grated floor. The others followed, but their arguments faded into the hum of shifting priorities. Volan didn't debate war. He prepared for it. In orbit, EDF Scout Station over Shanghai triggered emergency warnings. The sky turned amber. Dozens looked up from crowded streets as 3 black darts broke cloud cover. Too fast for sonic shockwaves, too clean for radar detection. There were no missile warnings, no alarms, just sudden heat, cascading shock fronts, and glass turning to dust as people scattered without direction. Mumbai's skyline fractured. Steel twisted mid-air before buildings detonated from within, kinetic impacts rewriting concrete into airborne debris fields. Dust smothered the air, choking every breath. Ambulances were shredded before they could leave garages. Hundreds died without even hearing what had hit them. Back underground, the council feed froze. One delegate sobbed openly. Another vomited into his lap. No one spoke of retaliation, only evacuation. Volan stood before the reinforced vault housing Alacrity, Earth's only functional stealth frigate. Its curved black frame sat in a dock of silence, powered down to avoid electromagnetic detection. Its stealth drive, codenamed Westbrook, was an experimental leap, pieced together from wreckage recovered by divers in the Philippine Trench. Xantari debris converted into something no human should have touched. 2 engineers flanked the docking ramp. Both saluted. Volan didn't return the gesture. He simply placed his palm against the biometric pad and waited as the ship hissed to life. "Status," he asked, eyes already scanning the crew manifest on the adjacent plasma board. Drive integrity holding. Fuel cells at 91%, cloaking matrix still burns through heat faster than expected, but we can run dark for 6 hours without bleed. Good enough to get behind them? The engineer hesitated. If we cut all active beacons and ride low-orbit shadows, maybe. But, sir, once we cross that grid, there's no fallback. You know that. Volin stepped inside the vessel, and his voice lowered. If we don't cross, we've already fallen. Inside the ship, the air smelled of recycled plastic, solder, and clean lubricant, sharp and real. The low light bounced off the crew's helmets as they locked into their chairs. No one asked what they were doing. They knew. From the helmsman to the systems tactician, every man aboard had seen what happened in London, and what hadn't happened in time to stop it. Volin passed down the narrow corridor and entered the command deck. The laser plasma display lit up at his presence, flickering with a three-dimensional star map rotating across his forward arc. Dozens of red flickers marked Xantari interceptors. Not a single one had deviated course in hours. They were that confident. He sat, strapped in, and pulled the command harness over his shoulders. Clance Bay, begin silent cycle. The lights dimmed as external power disconnected. The docking clamps retracted. Alacrity became a ghost, drifting between shadows. Volin didn't speak as they launched. He watched the earth turn beneath them, watching the damage unravel on the edge of a continent still burning. After 4 minutes of total silence, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Marik, leaned closer. We're through their line of sight. No signal pings. They still don't see us. Volin's hand closed over the edge of the command board. Because they never thought we could hide. Not from this close. A soft vibration ran through the hull as the Westrook drive fully engaged. The lights dipped further. All systems cut to passive read. Alacrity vanished. Just a low object slipping across orbital debris fields. In the void above them, Xantari command ships passed like blind gods, massive, armored, slow but sure. Their path never changed. And Volin finally exhaled. His words were barely above a whisper. One chance. We vanish right through them. Behind him, the crew began preparing for war. Status. Clean. They haven't even shifted formation. Marik replied, leaning over the console as sweat beaded along his brow. They're still blind. Captain Eric Volin didn't nod. He stared at the relay of orbit-to-ground pulses blinking across the interface. The Xantari fleet remained rigid, warships like anchored statues above Earth, still believing their perimeter unbreached. Not one trajectory shifted to account for a human vessel gliding beneath them. The Alacrity moved like a needle through thread, weaving along cold orbital shadows. The cloaking array shaved thermal bleed into erratic pulses, bouncing heat signatures against the ruins of abandoned satellites. Their course ran tight between defunct orbital junk and smoldering debris trails. Volin's orders were clipped, his timing exact to the microcycle. They moved without trace, not from magic or myth, but from exacting memory and ruthless adaptation. Prepare strike pattern Delta 12, he said, already lifting the safety guard from his console. In the hold below, automated pods readied for deployment. Inside each one, destabilizer charges, kinetic slivers calibrated for Xantari's supply drones, each embedded with noise loop beacons. They wouldn't just disable, these packages would send echoes, mimicking phantom warships across half the hemisphere. Volin turned. Launch when shadow sinks over Jakarta grid line. Marik's hands flew across the input nodes. 3 seconds. The charges dropped clean from Alacrity's belly, no trails, no light. Moments later, across the Indian Ocean, a string of freighter drones stuttered mid-course. One dipped violently, lost orientation, then exploded. No fire, just an internal detonation that shredded it from spine to bulkhead. 2 others veered into each other in panic, caught in the fake ID tags planted by Volin's crew. Back on Earth, Those watching from secret command centers saw more than destruction. They saw pattern. The footage spread fast. In Sao Paulo's shattered council hall, survivors huddled beside a flickering projector as it replayed a satellite feed of Zantari drones convulsing mid-air. In the tunnels beneath Istanbul's scorched skyline, resistance fighters listened to the broken rhythm of enemy convoys halting for the first time since arrival. In Tokyo's submerged metro platforms now reinforced as bunkers, officers stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at the tracking feed with widening eyes. "He's not hitting them directly," a young tactician whispered. "He's bleeding their spine." EDF command reconvened, this time not in chaos, but in motion. General Haldon spoke first. "We can coordinate around this. Use the gaps he makes. Shift all strike proposals to support his lines. Volan isn't buying us time. He's carving it." Arguments came. Skepticism lingered. Some states still refused to engage, citing the overwhelming risk, the unrecoverable damage already done. But the fear began to thin, replaced by the first cold spark of something more dangerous. Hope. In an underwater base 2 kilometers beneath Greenland's shelf, Alacrity docked long enough to cool systems and recharge filters. The hideout had once been a research station, long decommissioned after deep pressure fractures compromised its labs. Now it served as a crypt where silence was law. Volan stepped out, air biting cold against his cheeks. The walls dripped from condensation. Each step echoed louder than a gunshot. A man approached from the shadows. Commander Reese Vale, former EDF cyber warfare chief, recalled from retirement after the first orbital assault. He wore no insignia, no rank, only a dark jacket and old scars across his temple. "You're cutting them open," Vale said, "but we both know bleeding's not fatal to creatures like them." "Which is why I'm not done," Volan gestured toward a terminal buried behind layered shielding. "I need interference maps, terrain overlays, anywhere their sightline breaks." Vale nodded once, keyed in the request, then paused. "There's chatter. Some EDF branches are calling for a formal surrender proposal." Volan's face didn't change. "Then cut them off. They can negotiate from the ashes, if there's anything left." Outside, the enemy had begun responding, not fast, but with direction. The Zantari had deployed 3 smaller recon fleets to Quadrant 6, sweeping grids Volan had passed through hours earlier. They were hunting backward, unaware he'd already shifted. Inside Alacrity, the tension was not vocal. It came in subtle glances, tightened shoulders, hands lingering too long on controls. Each crewman knew one mistake would turn them from a shadow into a flare. "Are we ghosts or targets?" one operator finally asked. "We're neither," Volan replied. "We're infection." His next plan took root in the ruined outskirts of Bucharest. The city had fallen quickly. Rooftops gutted, avenues split by thermal lances. But beneath the concrete still lived a skeleton of subway lines, abandoned fuel depots, and cooling ducts that hadn't been touched in decades. It was here that Volan planted the next strike. Using a decoy shuttle wrapped in broadcast echo tech, he tricked a convoy of refueling bots into descending over a false request ping. As they hovered, Alacrity's kinetic rail system fired from a submerged outflow pipe, obliterating their thruster rings in a single blast. No one saw where the shot came from. No one saw Alacrity drift away into the murk. Over the next 40 hours, EDF's encrypted networks lit up with fragmented footage, red flares over Laos, downed Zantari landers in the Mojave, cargo pods exploding mid-slight over southern Argentina. Volan watched each feed alone in the ship's aft compartment, reading reports by smell more than sight. The burnt insulation from overworked reactors, the salted tang of reclaimed air running too long on filters. He read by feel. Each tap of the datapad a heartbeat in retreat. The Zantari finally adjusted. They expanded recon protocols, doubling scout frequency. Instead of automated patrols, they began inserting crude spotters into search arcs. Still, nothing touched alacrity, because by then Volan wasn't in the grid. He'd made his own. In the war room beneath northern Alaska, General Halden updated the EDF's command structure. We are no longer defending, we are reacting with consequence. And all vectors move around Volan. He has become the field. The Council, what remained of it, voted to authorize full synchronization under Volan's operational algorithms. Some did it with shaking hands, others with open resentment. But none refused. Back aboard Alacrity, a junior officer leaned over the terminal, his face ghosted in red from alert lights. They're re-neutering again, this time deeper scans. Volan tapped the side of the display. Too late. We're already where they think we wouldn't dare go. The crew didn't speak. They didn't cheer. They simply followed. And as the ship moved through another trench line beneath the mid-Atlantic ridge, so silent it left no trace, the same officer stared at the tracker overlay and whispered to himself, "They're hunting a shadow, and it's bleeding them." The static cracked feed flickered once, then held. A long shot of an orbiting Xantari relay flashed onto the screen, stamped with telemetry overlays, altitude notations, drift vectors. Volan stood motionless in the center of the cold-pressed command chamber, buried beneath the Arctic, eyes locked on the data reel, scrolling down the right-hand side. "They're using chained satellite pairs," muttered Dutter Karnhovel, lead systems architect for EDF's Deep Signal Division. His breath fogged faintly in the unheated facility, the recycled air thin and dry. "Every node talks to 5 others. The second you take one out, 3 shift their roles. It's self-healing. And we don't have the keys." "They didn't expect us to look here," Volan replied. He leaned forward, pressing 2 fingers to the magnetic table. "But that's their mistake. Because this is how they think they're untouchable." Marek stepped closer, rubbing frost from his shoulder. "Every fleet maneuver we've seen, their strike formations, drone re-neutering, it all depends on that net holding up. No wonder they're not panicking. It's their spine." "And if we crack the encryption?" asked Vale, voice gravel-thick from lack of sleep. "Then we jam their vision, their ships don't fight, they fumble." Pavel turned toward the old storage crate at the edge of the room. He brushed the frost from the latches and pulled it open, to reveal a relic that most had forgotten. A blackened processor core salvaged from the 2047 Xantari wreckage off Antarctica. The unit still bore fused scar lines where the containment frame had warped during impact. Its casing hissed as it adjusted to the room's pressure. "You're not still running that through public cores, are you?" Marek frowned. "I'm not," Havel answered. "But this thing thinks differently. It doesn't follow our systems. It runs recursive logic at chaotic intervals. The Xanthari AI didn't scale. It learned sideways." He set the device into a cold link adapter and fed the current in. The terminal sparked faintly before loading its first interface. No splash screens. Just raw code snapping in unpredictable pulses. "Feeded every relay captured from Alacrity's last sweep," Volan said. "Already done. And Earth's global universities have dropped every Xantari wreck dump into the cloud. We've got 30 years of fragments to run through. If there's a pattern in their encryption, we'll find it." Across the table, analysts rotated shifts every 6 hours, breathing cold air through clenched jaws. Their fingers moved like machines, scrolling, dissecting, rewriting code faster than it could compile. The back wall was covered with projected schematics, spheres, coils, transmitter webs, interlaced timing wheels. It looked like madness. But somewhere in the chaos, symmetry began to form. Meanwhile, Alacrity kept cutting deeper into Xantari operations. In the low orbit belt above Africa's equator, they found a cluster of cargo transports idling too long. Volan's order came without flare, The team launched a glide drop from the upper atmosphere, deploying a series of adhesive drones shaped to mimic debris. Once attached, they rerouted power signatures just enough to create system conflict. Within 5 minutes, 2 transports shut down their own navigation, a third drifted straight into its companion. Volin watched the footage without speaking. Back on Earth, nations without direct engagement capabilities began rallying, offering their data archives, thermal scans, satellite footage, encrypted backups once considered worthless. From Iceland to Indonesia, fractured states were synchronizing under a single purpose. It wasn't unity, it was survival. But even in momentum, doubt held corners of the war room. "We still don't have full key access," Havel admitted on the 5th night, wiping at his eyes with a shaking hand. "The deeper we go, the more random their intervals look." "They're not random," Volin said. "They're recursive." Havel blinked. "What a loop," Volin continued. "They learn by breaking their own patterns." "That's why your linear mapping failed." Merrick leaned in. "Then how the hell do we fight that?" "You don't," Volin replied. "You mirror it." He turned to Vale. "Run a ghost matrix. Feed their learning back into itself. Create a pattern so clean, it breaks the one they built." Vale hesitated, then gave a tight nod. "We'll need more cores. And an isolated run. One mistake, and it'll flag us. Then don't make one." Hours passed like heartbeat clusters. In the deep silence, the only sound was keys tapping against hardened plastic and processors warming beneath reinforced coolant tubes. Outside, wind screamed against steel as sub-zero currents clawed at the hull. Then, a shift. The Zentari core flashed 3 glyphs, ones the ETF linguistics team had flagged as legacy routing terms. The noise pattern aligned with 6 recorded Zentari relay signals. Havel double-checked, then triple-checked. His hands trembled as he spun his chair. "Is learning them." Everyone stopped. "We need a deployment plan now," Vale said, already pulling cables. "We run this signal through a bounce cycle, scrub the origin, and build a data spike. If we hit a central relay, it'll spread on its own." Merrick moved toward the comms rig. Alacrity's already in position over segment 12. If we mask the feed through their cloaked node, it'll look like system noise. "We hit one relay," Volin said, "and the others respond before the Zantari know what happened." "Sir," one technician called from the far side. "Interception logs from segment 16 show conflict between their captains. Arguments over fleet drift. One's refusing realignment." Volin stepped toward the display. The data replayed. Jittery command bursts, overlapping chain of command updates. Orders were being overwritten mid-transmission. "They're fighting without a shared map," Volin muttered, "and it's tearing their timing apart." Evel's console chirped once. The decrypted signal appeared in hard text across the terminal. "Link chain fractured. Personal, null sync. Visual field, inert." Volin stared at the line, then lowered his voice to a near growl. "They can't see." He glanced at Marek. "Time to blind them all. Cut artificial gravity, now." Volin's voice cracked through the bridge without pause. Chairs unlocked with a jolt, restraints clicked, and hands snapped to grips as the Alacrity pitched hard left, rolling beneath a slow arc of lunar debris. Their stealth path threaded between rock shadows and non-responsive satellites had taken 3 hours to plot and 30 seconds to override when a Zantari skimmer drifted 2 degrees off standard patrol. It didn't fire. It didn't spot them. But it had moved. That was enough. "Trajectory window closes in 90 seconds, Marek said, rotating a mechanical dial embedded into the reinforced helm board. "We burn past the relay's blind cone or abort the pass." "Hold angle, maintain crawl," Volin ordered, jaw locked. Behind them, the bridge lights pulsed with internal alerts. Heat buildup along the stealth housing, degradation in the external baffles. The ship wasn't designed for prolonged lunar drift. It was designed to vanish quickly, not linger inside a surveillance arc. Vale studied the relay blueprint on the auxiliary display. The node's shield rotation gives us 6 seconds. It cycles in elliptical rhythm. Every sweep opens one back door. He pointed to a flickering node in the corner. There. That's the entry vector. You miss that, the envelope tightens. Permanently. Valen didn't blink. We won't miss. The crew didn't cheer. They recalibrated, silently, one finger on power governors, another on breech ignition. A bead of sweat rolled from Marek's brow as he narrowed the thrust output to a near-narrow adjustment. The ship glided without resistance, nose down, aiming for the underside of the relay's rotating shell. Outside, the lunar surface shimmered with dry powder-gray rock, broken only by scattered remnants of early human probes. Dead, scorched, unrecognizable. The Xanthari relay structure rose behind a crater, encased in dark plating and tethered to 4 orbital stabilizers. Its broadcast array pulsed with colorless light, silent and ruthless. Havel's voice broke through comms. Our backfeed loop stable? You breach, we can override 5 satellites in sequence. They're locked to the relay's output hierarchy. Once it goes offline, they accept external ping. EMP payload? Charged. Synced. We only get 1 cycle, no resets. Valen nodded once, then triggered the final drift burst. The alacrity surged forward with a soundless lurch, cloaked systems rattling under stress. The ship dipped into the node's orbital shell, scraping less than 10 meters from the surface of the outer stabilizer. The impact shield crackled along the hull, flaring once before fading. Tien, Marek confirmed. Running silent. They passed under the primary shield arc. If the cycle timing was off by a fraction, every alarm would have sounded across the Xanthari command net. Nothing happened. Vale stared at the instruments. We're inside the heartbeat. Drop payload. Valen keyed the sequence. From the rear launch bay, 5 canisters detached, invisible in thermal and radar profiles. Each arced away in opposite directions, riding preloaded satellite drift tracks. Their warheads weren't designed to destroy, only to blind. On Earth, EDF installations awaited the signal, railgun operators calibrated by hand watching screens show slow orbital targets cruising above their cities. They waited. Ready. The relay pulsed once. Then again. The 5th pulse stuttered. Inside the Arctic command bunker, Havel slammed a palm to the table. We've got delay offset. One of the satellite echoes isn't firing. Force override, Bolin snapped. We'll fry the relay path. Then fry it. Seconds passed. Then the board turned white. All 5 hacked satellites responded in sequence. The EMP burst wasn't bright. It wasn't loud. It was exact. Each pulse detonated within microseconds of one another, overlapping fields to strip the Xanthari net of its synchronization memory. They didn't just lose feed, they lost sequence. Valen gripped the chair's edge. Pull us out. Get below lunar drift line, now. Marek hit 3 commands at once. The alacrity lurched downward, diving beneath a trajectory carved between microcrater ridges. No lights, no beacons, just raw inertia. Across the sector, Xanthari warships staggered. Onboard navigators, stripped of relay guidance, failed to coordinate trajectory data. Scout ships drifted out of formation. Battleships stopped relaying fire vectors. Interceptor formations paused, waiting for commands that didn't come. On Earth, EDF command towers lit up. Railguns, stationed on the lunar ridge and in Earth's low-orbit towers, opened fire in staggered volleys. No targeting required. They had trained for months on those orbits. Without adaptive shielding, the Xanthari vessels were vulnerable. 5 cruisers ruptured over the Atlantic. A mothership plunged into the lower mesosphere, breaking apart before reaching sea level. The sky didn't flash. It collapsed. Back aboard Alacrity, warning lights flashed across the boards. Interceptors, Marek barked. We've got 3 converging from Sector 4. Their systems are stabilizing, slower but coming. Set scramble, drop chaff markers. Ready internal jammers. The ship bucked right as one pulse grazed the rear stabilizer. Not a hit, just enough to throw balance off. Volin keyed in override. Burn secondary thrust. Spin, under crater wall. The maneuver wasn't clean. The ship clipped a stone shelf and scraped part of the rear housing. A series of red alerts screamed across the navigation arc. But they were down, hidden again. Inside the silence, the crew panted, backs soaked. Gloved hands clenched armrests. One tech's fingers bled from gripping his post too tightly. "They're routing recovery crews," Vael said, watching intercepted transmissions flicker in glitchy fragments. "They've realized the grid collapse isn't internal error." "They'll fix it," Volin said, pulling his harness tight. "They always do." He leaned back in the seat, breath steady but sharp. "If they fix this fast, we die," he murmured. "So, let's make fixing it a war of its own." The relay collapse echoed far beyond Earth's orbit. It ruptured confidence, not infrastructure. Deep within the vaults of the Xantari War Conclave, located on a carved-out asteroid core known as Trelevan Axis, the high strategists gathered under red-lit bioskin canopies. None spoke immediately. Across their bent crystalline data arcs, the feed from Earth's orbit played on loop, the synchronized EMP cascade, the disoriented fleet drifting like herded cattle, and the Earth railguns striking down vessels that minutes earlier had been impervious. "They coordinated 5 intercepts through breach loop timing," said Commander Vuroff, his tone rigid. "No swarm could have done that. This was a directed strike." "They should not be capable of this logic," another snapped. "The humans are not forming a swarm," Viralt replied. "They've formed an organism." At the edge of the hall, a junior liaison broke standard protocol and spoke uninvited. "And now, subworlds are hesitating. Rebellion traffic has tripled in 9 quadrants." The council fell silent. On the world of Jarkun 5, a client species long conscripted as drone repair laborers detonated 2 supply nodes and seized a minor drydock. A garbled transmission intercepted by EDF command showed the rebels holding banners woven with distorted human symbols. Misunderstood, but terrifyingly effective. "They think we won," said Vael, standing in EDF's Geneva command vault, watching the footage replay. "They're misreading the relay collapse as conquest." "Let them," Volin said. "Their morale is the sharpest tool we never forged." EDF repair zones across Earth buzzed with frantic construction. In Osaka's battered harbor, cranes hoisted collapsed orbital launch pads. In Nairobi, shattered comm towers were replaced with encrypted short-range arrays. Cities that had once relied on global dependency returned to local sovereignty under EDF's fractured umbrella. Every continent now had a rally point. Every military leader had one assignment: learn from alacrity. Volin's tactics were being converted into doctrine. In underground vaults near the Siberian Rift, instructors replayed battle segments on triple-angle holographs, marking evasive patterns with laser pointers, instructing squadrons on misdirection angles and flare drop decoys. Every man in EDF uniform now trained for asymmetry. There were no front lines, only exposure and leverage. Merrick stood in front of a digital map the size of a small room. "They've lost cohesion. Look at this." He pointed to systems once locked into synchronized patrols, now blinking with hesitation. "We can slip scout wings through here, here, and here. They're overcorrecting." Volin crossed his arms, eyes narrowing. "That kind of disarray doesn't come from damage. It comes from doubt." Back in orbit, Alacrity had docked inside a gutted satellite shell that once relayed mineral survey data from the moon. The ship sat in darkness, its systems offline to avoid backtrace. Volin walked the narrow corridor, stepping over exposed wiring, breathing recycled air laced with faint adhesive resin and battery tang. He stopped near the forward ops chamber, where a crewman monitored Xantari internal transmissions fed through ground-level intercepts. "They're starting to accuse each other," the tech said without looking up. "Command nodes blaming mid-tier generals, planetary overseers pushing it on relay engineers. Valen leaned closer. Any signs of defection? Not yet, but they're splitting their council meetings across multiple nodes. Paranoia. Inside EDF's main strategy hall in Iceland, Viel adjusted a stream of civilian data overlaid with military activity. We've got 6 populated rebel worlds broadcasting Earth-resistant slogans. Some even mimic our encrypted tone formats. Poorly, but deliberately. They want to be seen aligned, Margaret said. Even if it's a lie we can use, Volan added. If the Xantari believe we're influencing revolts directly, they'll pull troops from the front. We give them a ghost war on their own borders? Across the rim worlds, the effect snowballed. The client species, who had long lived under resource quotas and orbital curfews, began airing intercepted Earth broadcasts. Footage of Xantari warships falling above Earth became a symbol, not of human power, but of alien fallibility. On the world of Yes Tor, transport drones were grounded by workers refusing to load ammunition. On Revik Station, anti-grav stabilizers were sabotaged, delaying a carrier launch for 9 Earth days. EDF never contacted them. They simply existed. And that was enough. Inside EDF command, the tone began to shift. Reports now included tactical victories. Downed cruisers, jammed patrol grids, recovered satellite nodes. Even once unlikely governments now sent supply units to reinforce strike zones. Confidence, once rationed, now spread like acceleration. Yet the silence from the Xantari primary fleet unnerved them all. Valen studied the absence of activity in sectors previously brimming with Xantari mass signatures. They're consolidating, waiting for the storm to pass. They're not waiting, Vale replied grimly. They're gathering. That confirmation arrived hours later. EDF's deep orbit monitors flared with new data. Massive energy readings on the far side of Pluto's elliptical orbit, strange configurations, tethered cruiser forms. No movement at first, then coordinated propulsion. A dozen capital-class hulls, flagship-class size markers. One of the analysts stepped back from the screen, voice dry. We're reading them now. A new shape formed on the map, larger than anything previously recorded in Xantari fleet records. 3 times the mass of their heaviest destroyers. Shield generators thicker than anything Earth could pierce conventionally. Its identifier came tagged with a symbol Earth had only seen once, encoded in a relay burst years ago, dismissed as ceremonial. Merrick exhaled, sharp and low. The Annihilator. General Halden entered the command room, flanked by 2 tactical aides. His uniform was still dusty from inspection rounds, but his voice carried steel. Every city with a defense node activates tonight. All remaining EDF reserves relocate to second-tier launch points. This is no longer about raids. They're sending a message. Valen stared at the orbital feed. The ships kept coming, still miles out from intercept zones, still aligning. But their presence drew a new shape into Earth's night sky. Above every continent, astronomers looked up. Lights moved in unnatural patterns. Stars shifted. Valen stepped into the Alacrity's forward bay, staring through the reinforced viewing panel. They're coming, Marek said beside him. Valen didn't blink. Then we hold them here. Tokyo's upper atmosphere fractured first. The clouds didn't part, they were shoved, forced away by the gravitational sink that preceded the Xantari flagship. Lights in the city glitched, cell towers blacked out in waves. Windows buckled under invisible shifts in atmospheric pressure. Then came the thunder, a rolling concussive wave not from sound but from the distortion of air itself. Bent around a mass descending faster than any object had a right to fall. Volan stood inside Alacrity's forward strike bay, gripping a reinforced rail. Every deck trembled beneath his boots. No one spoke, no one had to. The Annihilator had entered the lower orbital belt. They're sweeping the upper hemisphere, Marek said, reading a clustered feed of magnetic surges. Not targeting, erasing. Screens across EDF's global defense net flared with overlapping alerts. 30 cities reported orbital ionization at once. Defense satellites caught glimpses, a ship unlike anything in the Xanthari database, layered in asymmetrical hulls, its surface shifting under gravitational distortion, as if reshaping to fit nothing but destruction. EDF cruiser groups scrambled to meet it. 4 didn't last 30 seconds. The ship didn't fire beams or launch missiles. It simply radiated suppression fields, disrupting all signals, all calibration. Defense platforms fired wildly, striking nothing. Conservative reports rolling in, Vale said flatly. Karachi, gone. Johannesburg crippled. Seoul's orbital guns are down. Volin didn't react to the list. Do we have access? Eric answered, without turning. Still sync to the broken relay paths. Comms are choppy but viable. We're close enough to bounce piggyback signals. Vale approached, sliding a drive into the secondary interface terminal. We built the viral packet off the Xanthari's own field key protocols. When injected into their master array, it'll mimic an internal update request. Success rate? Assuming they're still running auto-authentication and haven't shifted to manual. Vale paused, then offered only a shrug. Volin nodded. Deploy it anyway. Alacrity dove into position, skimming the edge of a ruined orbital scrapyard. Solar panels and twisted satellite remains bounced off the outer hull like loose gravel. The ship's body groaned from the friction. Volin gritted his teeth as they passed through the magnetic interference caused by the Annihilator's entry vector. On board EDF Command, global tacticians funneled real-time footage to drone wings positioned for a retaliatory swarm. Hundreds of remote units, mostly unmanned, circled just outside the blast envelope, waiting for a signal. Vale keyed the final command. The virus packet jumped. They watched nothing happen. For 4 seconds, the data feed remained dead. Then, a flicker. Inside the Annihilator's network, the master shielding array stuttered. For the first time since its arrival, the ship's armor mapping dimmed. Not breached, just visible. Volin turned to Marek. Now. EDF launched everything. Drone wings spiraled inward, slinging dense core payloads, skipping along fractured orbital routes. They didn't aim for kills, they aimed to dig. Dozens were lost on approach, torn apart by defense pulses or shredded in atmosphere turbulence, but enough reached the hull. Explosives planted in undercarriage joints, sensor domes, and unmarked seams detonated in rapid rhythm. Fragment clouds burst across the sky, carving jagged trails. Cracks are forming, Vale shouted. We can see inside. A new group deployed EDF's covert infiltration unit, codenamed Unit Ember. 24 soldiers in refracted armor dropped from a high-altitude orbital pod, rigged for silent descent. Their suits adjusted in real time to the Annihilator's shielding distortions, filtering noise and bending trajectories mid-fall. 5 were lost before impact. The remaining 19 landed on the hull. Each member carried a core charge, low yield, high density, enough to compromise the Annihilator's inner conduits. But only 3 had the full blast kit required to reach the fusion nodes buried in its center spine. Inside Alacrity, Volin's breath slowed. We lose them, we lose everything. On the hull of the Xanthari ship, Ember moved in silence. Not even internal comms were active. They used hand signals, light taps, and pre-timed motion. One slipped near a shifting joint vent and vanished, dragged in by hull oscillation. 2 more were lost near a venting duct. The rest pushed on. They found a service tunnel, likely meant for internal AI drones. The entry was too narrow for human passage. They detonated a microsplitter, carved a hole, and crawled. Below Earth, in hardened bunkers across 7 continents, millions watched silent feeds broadcast from Alacrity. There was no commentary, no tactical voiceover, just raw, soundless video. Human forms advancing into something not made for them. Inside the Annihilator, lights didn't flicker. They shifted hue in slow pulses. The air smelled like scorched ceramic and recycled coolant. Ember's lead, Lieutenant Harson, placed the charge in the central chamber. He keyed the timer manually. The unit wasn't remote. If it failed, it wouldn't be retriggered. If it succeeded, it wouldn't need to be. He activated it. Seconds later, the central feed on EDF's command board froze. Then it burned white. The Annihilator convulsed. A chain reaction lit up the night side of Earth. The detonation didn't scream. It tore silently, vibrating through air, cracking windows across multiple continents. People ran to rooftops and stared upward. Children pointed. Adults forgot to breathe. The flagship split into 4 fragments, its outer layers peeling like shattered shell. The atmospheric friction caught the debris and lit the sky over the Pacific. Orange trails, curving, descending, vaporizing. No signal followed. No threats. No explanations. The Xantari comms channels, long monitored by Earth, broadcast nothing. For the first time in their war doctrine's history, there was silence. Real, calculated, intentional silence. Vale leaned against the wall, unable to speak. Merrick wiped his hands on his uniform, unaware that they were shaking. Valen remained still. His voice was low when it finally came. Bailey thought power made them invincible. He looked at the broken sky. Turns out they were just loud. The fragments of the Annihilator hadn't finished burning when the fractures began to spread. Above the fractured crust of Europa Outpost 6, 3 Xantari gunships drifted without formation. Their lights flickered out of sequence. Navigation trails jittered. No command signals arrived. In EDF Command Central, deep beneath the Antarctic strata, Marek stared at a rotating interface screen stitched with alien broadcast captures. "They've stopped syncing," he said. "Command hierarchies collapsed. No new orders sent since detonation." Volan leaned over his shoulder. "Can they still function?" Vale stepped in, holding a handheld slate loaded with intercepted Xantari dispute transcripts. "If shouting at each other counts as function, sure. Field captains are contradicting each other. One ordered a retreat from Triton's orbit, another deployed a siege line to reinforce it. They're eating their own timing." It was happening everywhere. In orbit around Loranus Prime, Xantari strike cruisers were ambushed by their own client militia. The Kurgans, once enslaved as maintenance drones, had reverse-engineered their restraint implants and turned orbital drilling gear into kinetic projectiles. Their broadcast, grainy and chaotic, was captured by EDF recon probes and translated later. "We serve no voice. We serve survival." EDF commanders reacted instantly. Valen's plan, already in draft form, accelerated. Rather than engage en masse, Earth's fleet split into smaller mobile strike clusters, weaving through weakened Xantari logistics lines. Targets were selected with surgical intent. Fuel refineries, long-haul comm hubs, dry docks still half-loaded with vessels too heavy to fly and too slow to run. "Don't push their fighters," Valen said during briefing. "Cut the limbs. Starve the nerves." In Sector D9, Alacrity emerged from a gas-ringed asteroid belt and speared a convoy of supply freighters with high-yield darts. Their shielding, once flawless, now shorted out intermittently. Volan didn't waste the window. A second volley shattered their cargo cores. The wreckage rained across the orbital shelf like frozen shrapnel. At the same time, Earth's ground forces launched raids on secondary worlds. In a cratered plain on Drothic 7, EDF squads in adaptive armor moved under sandstorms, their visors streaked with static and heat fog. They didn't march, they hunted. 3 days of local fighting ended when the Xantari control node detonated from inside, triggered by one of their own translators who'd switched allegiance. Back aboard Alacrity, Vale reviewed streamlines of data pouring in from the outer rim. Client rebellions are turning into uprisings. 5 systems have declared secession from Xantari rule in the last 12 hours. "Do they have coordination?" Volan asked. "Not even close. They're improvising. But they are winning." Marek added from across the room. And they're crediting Earth. They're naming us in their rally codes. EDF didn't slow down. Orbital mines were redeployed to key jump gates, disruption fields seeded along trade arteries. Any trace of Xantari supply was targeted. No fleet engagement unless necessary. Every ship Earth lost now cost the Xantari 10. On Kirill's moon, an abandoned Xantari listening post was taken by EDF Marines within minutes. Not a single defender remained. Scrawled on the inner chamber walls were glyphs. The Xantari symbol, for Forsaken. EDF Command reviewed the update logs in stunned silence. They're not regrouping, General Halden said, arms crossed, jaw tight. They're retreating without even saying it. Volan watched from the far end of the table. It's not retreat, it's collapse. Each day brought another transmission, sometimes encrypted, sometimes openly blasted across deep space. Former subjugates now coordinated strikes of their own. Xantari captains abandoned posts, some detonated their vessels rather than face capture. In one battle over Cedrus 4, ETF drones breached a Xantari cruiser only to find its command deck empty. The lights flickered. No weapons fired. The ship floated. Dead weight with no orders. Vale sat in Alacrity's lower tactical bay, voice low. They built an empire on obedience. Without the voice above them, they freeze. Merrick responded, pulling new intercepts from his feed. They're transmitting localized emergency beacons. Internal commands are clashing. Some crews are asking permission to stand down. Others are jamming their own fleet signals to avoid being pulled into crossfire. In EDF's main chamber, Volan updated the campaign board. He didn't use colors. He used movement. Circles for stillness, arrows for mobility. The board filled fast. Half the Xantari sector had gone dark by week's end. Dockyards in Kivari drifted without gravity fields. Drone production facilities, once automated, now echoed with silence. No repairs, no launches. In some regions, Xantari warships fell into planetary orbit uncontrolled, cratering into oceans or deserts without a single enemy shot fired. And still, Earth pressed forward. But not out of vengeance, not from rage. They advanced to keep the collapse from becoming a reset. Cutting them isn't enough, Volan told Command. We erase their ability to rise again. No structure left intact. No signal relays. No fallback cache. Merrick turned to him in a rare moment of hesitation. And when do we stop? Volan stared at the map, where the border of Xantari influence had been redrawn by silence. When we've made forgetting Earth impossible. That night, Alacrity docked briefly with Earth's orbiting command tower. It was quiet. No parades, no cheers, just cold handoffs, fresh data feeds, and unspoken exhaustion. Volan didn't rest. He walked alone to the observation wing, staring at the war-scarred sky. The stars flickered across the display. Dozens of them marked fallen relays, burnt battlefields, abandoned systems. Others blinked as old Xantari sectors now free. He touched the edge of the console. They thought we were fighting to live, he murmured. We were fighting to remember who we are. The grass around the eastern impact site hadn't grown back. Nothing had. Where the Annihilator's fragments slammed into Earth, the crater still steamed. A thick mist clung to broken concrete walls, melted rail tracks, and rows of scorched scaffolding that had once been part of Tokyo's civilian shield array. The memorial platform stood in the middle, built from repurposed armor plating salvaged from Earth's first downed cruiser. Names lined the interior panels, laser scored, hand-finished, no holograms, no music, just cold steel, raw numbers, and the weight of survival. Volan stood alone before the northern wall, coat heavy from rain. His right arm remained wrapped from the last orbital fracture, nerve damage that never healed clean. Behind him, hundreds of visitors passed silently through the corridors, reading names with the stillness of men who knew they could have been one of them. A young officer approached, holding out a tablet with fresh figures from the outer colonies. He didn't speak until Volin turned. 10 more systems just cut ties from the Zentari network, he said. They're not declaring allegiance, just refusing to report up. Volin nodded. It'll keep happening. They're afraid. No, Volin replied. They're watching, and we can't afford to give them a second image to model after. Back in Geneva, global delegates had tried 3 times to convince him to take the high seat in the newly formed defense syndicate. Each time, he refused. Politics was not the next battle. Doctrine was. Deep beneath Norway's glacial mountains, in what had once been a strategic storage vault, Volin converted an old EDF war room into the core of Earth's new doctrinal design unit. It held no flags, no broadcast cameras, just specialists, tacticians, cybernetics engineers, and case analysts trained in pattern warfare. He laid out 4 tenets, sketched not on glossy boards but inked onto heavy-duty wall sheeting in permanent black. Stealth before strength, adaptation before escalation, information before engagement, exit before exposure. He didn't argue for domination. He designed deterrence. It was called the Volin Doctrine, and within a month, every EDF officer received mandatory operational training based on its pillars. Simulation chambers across the globe were updated. Orbital academies restructured their curriculum. The next generation of Earth's fleet was already being redesigned. Smaller, faster, harder to track. Built not to posture, but to vanish, until the time came to strike. Still, peace never returned. It only changed shape. Earth's cities rose again from the fractures, but not without tension. Disputes over salvage rights flared between continental blocks. Wreckage from Zentari vessels spread across oceans and valleys, sparked legal fights over tech conversion, energy replication, and territorial ownership. Dozens of low-intensity border standoffs were reported in the first year alone. In response, Volin established a secondary charter. No singular nation would control alien tech. All findings were routed through a neutral, transparent data feed accessible to all Earth signatories. Nations hated it. Corporations protested, but no one challenged it outright. His reputation enforced compliance better than any sanction ever could. On Koran Delta, a Zentari world now functionally lawless, reports surfaced of an Earth vessel appearing over one of their old listening stations. No records confirmed it. No EDF logs acknowledged a visit. But the station deactivated days later, and its relay feed shut down without recovery. In the black markets of Draken Reach, smugglers began refusing any human-aligned clients for fear of retaliation from an invisible force they couldn't trace. They didn't call it a fleet. They didn't use names. They called it doctrine. Earth had become something new, not an empire, not a rebellion, but a pattern of consequence. Not loud, not public, just permanent. Inside the war room bunker, Marek sat beside a long table with Volin, flipping through satellite updates from once hostile sectors. We've destabilized an empire. Their hierarchies splintered. Whole regions refuse to speak the language anymore. And yet they still don't understand how we won, Volin said, eyes fixed on a blinking grid map overhead. They think it was timing, or luck, or some buried weapon. Marek leaned forward. What was it then? Volin didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the main console, and input a string of commands that filtered the star map until only one arc remained. The path Alacrity had taken, weeks ago, past the grid no one thought penetrable. They built everything to intercept aggression, he said. We offered none. Not until it was too late. Vale entered from the side, carrying a slate with updates from Zantari-controlled trade ports. They've begun sealing their relay gates from the inside, blocking outbound movement. No explanation given. They're afraid of the unknown, Marek said. Volin corrected him. They're afraid we understood them. Rain tapped gently against the outer shield dome as the bunker's lights dimmed to conserve power. Across the continents, new defense arrays were brought online. Less visible, more distributed. Humanity wasn't celebrating, it was reorganizing. And in the far corners of the Orion Arm, uncrumbling Xantari colonies once thought eternal, children now whispered stories about Earth, not as a warning, but as a question. What kind of species disappears through your defenses, walks past your throne, and only speaks after it burns your gods? Valen stood in the doorway of the bunker, watching a fresh batch of recruits run drills in the mud outside. They moved in teams, silent, deliberate, efficient. No formations, no banners, just movement, just readiness. A junior tech approached with a brief update on orbital interceptor placements. Valen didn't look away from the field. "Do they still think we're coming for territory?" he asked quietly. The tech hesitated. "Some do. Others think we've already taken it." Valen finally turned. "They're both wrong." He walked back inside, placed one final annotation in the doctrine field, and keyed it into the permanent global ledger. Certainty was never ours to take, only theirs to lose.